a small town shrouded in the shadows of pines, there was a restaurant called Golden Burger. It attracted locals with its bright neon lights and enticing menu. However, this establishment had a dark reputation. Rumors about the Golden Burger began to spread after several customers went missing. It was said that at night, strange sounds resembling hoarse screams could be heard coming from the kitchen. Yet for most, these were just urban legends until one night a group of friends decided to investigate what was really happening. They arrived at the restaurant late in the evening, when the lights flickered and a peculiar smell wafted from the kitchen. A pale-faced waiter with empty eyes seated them at a table in the corner. The menu featured only one item, burger of the day. The friends exchanged puzzled glances, but hunger prevailed, and they placed their order. When the food arrived, the burger looked appetizing, but there was something unsettling in the waiter's gaze. As they began to eat, the more they chewed, the more they felt something was off. The taste was unusual, metallic, and with each bite, visions of the missing people flashed in their minds. Suddenly, the lights went out, plunging them into darkness. From the kitchen door came a raspy laugh. Panic-stricken, the friends stood up and headed for the exit, but the door slammed shut with a loud clang. The waiter appeared before them, his face twisted in a grimace, holding a knife. "Did you think you could just leave our restaurant?" he hissed. The friends realized they had become part of a cruel game and, like many before them, could vanish without a trace. In the dark, screams echoed, and only one of them managed to escape through a window. He would never forget that dinner, and the Golden Burger closed the next day. But the town continued to hear about it, and the missing remained forever trapped within the walls of that sinister establishment. Story number 3. In a small English town, lost among misty hills, there was a restaurant called Moonlight. It was known for its exquisite cuisine and cozy atmosphere, but with each passing year, it became less popular. Locals increasingly avoided it, whispering about strange occurrences that took place there. It was said that once, on this very spot, there stood a mansion where a mysterious family lived. The legend told that during one of their lavish feasts, their guests vanished without a trace, and the house was soon abandoned. Many years later, when the building was converted into a restaurant, odd things began happening in the kitchen. Dishes shattered for no apparent reason, and faint whispers occasionally filled the air. One day, a group of friends decided to visit Moonlight, drawn by rumors of the famous chef and his unusual dishes. They entered the restaurant and were greeted by a dimly lit interior with dark wooden panels and low ceilings. On the walls hung antique portraits depicting people in old-fashioned attire, seemingly alive and watching every move the guests made. With each dish they ordered, the tension grew. The chef, a tall, gaunt man with a pale face, approached them with a mysterious smile and offered them a special dish he had just prepared. The friends exchanged glances, unsure of what to say, and reluctantly agreed. After the first bite, they tasted something strange. It was both familiar and horrifyingly unusual. Suddenly, the lights in the restaurant began to flicker, and the shadows on the walls seemed to shift. One of the friends, Kat, felt a cold touch on her shoulder. She turned around but saw no one. With each passing minute, the atmosphere grew increasingly oppressive. Outside, a heavy rain began to fall, and the sound of raindrops resembled a quiet weeping. Other guests started to panic and attempted to leave, but the doors had locked. Thick fog covered the windows, rendering their cries useless. When they glanced back at the chef, he was now standing by the wall where one of the antique portraits hung. His eyes glowed in the dim light, reflecting something elusive. Suddenly, he raised his hands, and the friends noticed that on his wrists were ancient bracelets, identical to those worn by the people depicted in the painting. Filled with fear, Kat dashed toward the door, but invisible hands held her back. A quiet whisper echoed in her mind, "You cannot leave until you complete the feast." Story number 4. In a small town shrouded in whispers and secrets, a courier named Alex worked the night shift at a popular restaurant called Midnight Delicacies. The eatery was known for its delectable dishes, attracting late-night diners and those looking for a midnight snack. But there was an unspoken rule among the staff: never accept orders from the old cemetery on the outskirts of town. Alex, however, was a newcomer, eager to prove himself and make a name in the bustling restaurant scene. Each night, as the sun dipped below the horizon, he donned his uniform, grabbed his delivery bag, and hopped on his motorcycle. The streets were often eerily quiet, with only the flickering neon lights illuminating his path. One particularly uneventful night, as he waited for orders to roll in, his phone buzzed with an alert. A delivery request had come in, but the address sent a shiver down his spine. It was to the old cemetery. Memories of warnings from his coworkers flooded back, but curiosity overpowered his caution. "I can handle it," he thought, dismissing the unsettling feelings. He revved up the engine and set off into the darkness. As he approached the cemetery, the moonlight cast ghostly shadows across the gravestones. He parked his motorcycle and stepped into the graveyard, the cold air wrapping around him like an unwelcome embrace. A figure in a long black cloak stood beside a particularly ancient grave, her face hidden beneath the hood. "I brought your order," Alex called out, forcing confidence into his voice. The figure remained silent, slowly turning to face him. An unsettling coldness emanated from her, sending a jolt of fear through him. Suddenly, he heard a faint crackling sound, as if something fragile were tearing. The woman raised her hand, and a chilling whisper filled the air. "You shouldn't have come here." Before he could react, his motorcycle sputtered and died. Panic surged through him as he looked around, but the figure had vanished. Only the whispering wind filled the air, weaving through the trees and gravestones. Heart pounding, he turned to leave, but the path seemed to twist and change, as if the cemetery itself were alive. Stumbling forward, he felt an overwhelming sense of dread. The laughter and cries of distant voices echoed around him, a haunting melody that grew louder with each passing moment. The ground felt unsteady beneath his feet, and shadows darted between the graves. "Get out! Get out," he shouted to himself, desperation creeping into his voice. But each step he took seemed to pull him deeper into the graveyard's grip. Suddenly, a gust of wind knocked him off balance, and he fell to the ground. The whispers grew louder, surrounding him, pulling at the edges of his sanity. He could feel something cold and sharp brushing against his skin, and he knew he wasn't alone. With renewed determination, Alex scrambled to his feet and bolted toward the exit. Just as he reached the gate, a shadow surged forward, blocking his way. It was the cloaked figure again, her voice now a cacophony of whispers. "You must pay the price for disturbing the dead." In that moment, Alex felt a powerful force pulling him back. He struggled, but the shadows tightened around him, dragging him down. The last thing he saw before everything went black was the moonlight shining on the grave where the figure had stood. When dawn broke, his colleagues at Midnight Delicacies noticed his absence. They called his phone, but it went straight to voicemail. Concerned, they set out to find him. After searching the streets and nearby areas, they finally made their way to the cemetery. The sight that greeted them was chilling. His motorcycle lay abandoned near the entrance, and the air was heavy with a sense of foreboding. They called his name, but only silence answered. One of his co-workers spotted something glinting in the grass near a grave. It was Alex's delivery bag, untouched. Days turned into weeks, and as the townspeople mourned the loss of Alex, Midnight Delicacies continued to thrive. Yet, no one dared to place an order for delivery to the cemetery. Rumors spread, tales of a haunted graveyard where a lost courier roamed, forever bound to the night. On nights when the wind howled, residents sometimes heard faint whispers carried on the breeze, warning them not to venture into the shadows. And late at night, if you listened closely, you might hear a motorcycle revving in the distance, searching for its lost rider in the depths of the darkness. Story number 5. I always felt a bit out of place in my small town of Somerview. The neighbors knew me as the quiet guy who spent all day in his room with a paintbrush in hand. My dream of becoming an artist seemed distant and almost unattainable. One day, while walking home from my job at the cafe, I noticed a strange glow in the forest that surrounded the town. Intrigued, I decided to check it out. I made my way through the dense trees and soon found myself in a small clearing. What I saw made my heart race, a huge glowing canvas surrounded by fireflies. As I approached, I saw images beginning to appear on the canvas. They were my own memories, laughter with friends, the joy of first successes, and even sad moments I had carefully hidden away. I felt warmth fill my chest. This place was alive, and I was part of its magic. With each new visit, I painted my dreams and fears. My paintings became increasingly vibrant and emotional, as if the forest itself inspired me. People in town began to notice the changes in me. I became more confident, and soon I decided to hold an exhibition of my work at the community center. When the day of the exhibition arrived, I was on the verge of a nervous breakdown. But when I saw people admiring my paintings, I realized that my dream was finally becoming a reality. However, with each success, I became more absorbed in my work, Forgetting about that magical place in the woods, my inspiration began to dwindle and I started to fear that I would lose my connection to art. One evening, when I couldn't find inspiration, I returned to the forest. I stood in that same clearing and saw the same canvas, but now it looked dimmer. I reached out, and suddenly dark images began to appear on it, my fears and doubts. In that moment, I realized that by turning away from the magical place, I had harmed myself. Art is not just about success and recognition. It's about sincerity and connecting with oneself. I began to paint my feelings again, opening up to the canvas as I had done before. With each new stroke, I regained the magic that had once inspired me. The forest shone again, and the fireflies, like faithful friends, began to dance around me. My paintings became vibrant and deep once more, filling the town with new emotions. At the next exhibition, I presented my new works. This time they spoke of the real of life, struggle, and love. People didn't just look at the paintings, they felt them, recognizing their own emotions within. I finally understood that true art is not just about talent, but about the ability to be vulnerable. I learned to appreciate the magic not only in success, but in every moment of life. Now, I regularly return to the forest, drawing inspiration and maintaining my connection to the place where my story began. Story number 6. Winter descended on the city with unimaginable force. Snow fell relentlessly for days, creating a white wasteland outside the window. I worked in a small restaurant on the outskirts that had always been filled with a cozy atmosphere and warmth. But this winter, something changed. That evening, when I found myself alone during my shift, only one customer entered the restaurant, a man in a long, dark coat. His face was hidden beneath a hood, and he held a frozen cup of coffee in his hands. I approached him, trying to create a friendly atmosphere, but his cold gaze made me shiver. "Order," I asked, attempting to hide my unease. He looked up, and in that moment, something inexplicable hung in the air. "What happens here in winter?" he asked, his voice like ice. I didn't know how to respond. I simply shrugged. I didn't want to dwell on what troubled me, why the restaurant was so empty, and why the snow continued to fall outside. I returned to the kitchen, trying to distract myself from dark thoughts. After preparing his soup, I noticed that another figure sat in the corner of the room. It appeared to be a blurred silhouette, lacking distinct outlines. I tried to focus on my work, but the feeling of being watched wouldn't leave me. When I served the soup, the man was no longer just eating. He was studying me, as if searching for something in my soul. I felt his cold eyes piercing into the depths of my consciousness. I attempted to strike up a conversation, but each question met his icy silence. Suddenly, the lights went out in the restaurant, leaving me alone in the darkness and a strange sense of dread. I tried to start the generator, but it didn't respond. The howling wind outside drowned out my thoughts, and the rustling sounds coming from the shadows made my heart race. At that moment, the man suddenly stood up, and his hood slipped off, revealing his face. I was taken aback. His eyes glowed like an animal's, and a terrifying grin played on his lips. He began to approach me, and I realized there was no escape in this restaurant. I felt a wave of fear wash over me, and just as he reached out his hand, the light flickered back on. But he was gone. I found myself alone in the dining room, and the atmosphere had shifted. I locked the doors and resolved never to work alone again. Inside, a growing feeling told me I wasn't just a victim of the winter chill, but a participant in something far darker. The next day, I returned for my shift, determined to find out what had happened. I began questioning my colleagues, but no one could explain who that strange man was. I started to explore the restaurant, under the tables, in the storeroom, even in the basement. Each time I opened a door, I felt as if I was trespassing on some hidden secret. Soon I learned that the restaurant had its own history. Locals whispered about how, in past winters, people came here who never left. They said some simply vanished, while others returned, but they were no longer themselves. That night, when I was alone again, I heard someone knocking at the door. My heart raced, and bracing myself for the worst, I opened it. Standing on the threshold was the same man. This time, his face was not hidden by a hood, and I saw that his skin was pale, and his eyes were bottomless. "You know why I'm here," he said, his voice echoing and filling the room. I tried to step back, but he quickly moved closer. His hand touched my shoulder, and in that moment I felt the cold seep into every cell of my body. Remembering the stories of the missing, I realized he had come for me. I shoved him away and dashed for the exit, but the door was locked. I turned back and saw shadows gathering behind the man, their shapes becoming clearer. Each shadow seemed to be the face of one of the lost. "You can't escape," he whispered, and I finally understood that here in this restaurant it was the end. Outside, a blizzard raged, the howling wind penetrated the walls, and I finally realized that this winter would be eternal. I was just a girl fresh out of high school, working a diner job to save for college. The diner was a cozy spot tucked away on the edge of town, frequented by a handful of regulars. It felt comforting, predictable, until Adrian walked in. He was in his mid-20s, quiet at first, always sitting by the window with his coffee and sandwich. At first I thought nothing of him. But soon, his harmless demeanor cracked. His comments turned personal about my uniform, my appearance. I brushed it off as harmless flirting, but the way he looked at me made my skin crawl. The first time he lingered outside after his meal, I thought it was coincidental. But as days turned into weeks, his presence grew more persistent. He'd stand across the street, hands in pockets, watching. I felt trapped in my own routine, trying to shake the feeling that he was becoming a shadow in my life. One evening, after a particularly long shift, I noticed Adrian waiting by the diner's entrance. My heart raced as I approached, ready to brush him off. But instead, he stepped forward, a sly grin on his face. "Why don't we get to know each other better?" I managed a polite smile, but inside I was panicking. "I really can't," I said, backing away. "I have to clean up." "Come on." "Just one drink," he pressed, his voice smooth like honey but laced with something darker. I could sense the shift in the air, a tension that made me uneasy. As I stepped inside the diner, I heard him call after me, his tone shifting from playful to menacing. "You can't hide forever, you know." That night, I locked every door and pulled the curtains tight, but the feeling of being watched didn't leave me. Days turned into a blur of anxiety. I felt trapped not just by Adrian, but by the diner itself. Then came Marco, the head chef at a trendy restaurant downtown. He was charismatic, a culinary genius with an aura of mystery. When I got an opportunity to work part-time in his kitchen, I jumped at it, hoping to escape the diner's grasp and Adrian's obsession. The restaurant was a bustling place, filled with the rich and famous, eager for Marco's creations. I was captivated by the energy, the artistry of the food. But soon, I noticed Marco's odd habits. After closing, he'd slip into the walk-in fridge, carrying unmarked jars and bundles wrapped in cloth. His whispers echoed like a haunting melody. Curiosity gnawed at me until one fateful night. I followed him. What I found in that cold, dark room was chilling. An altar, draped in herbs and strange artifacts, illuminated by flickering candles. Marco was chanting, and the air was thick with something potent and unsettling. "What are you doing?" I asked, dread pooling in my stomach. He turned slowly, a smile spreading across his face that didn't reach his eyes. "This is what keeps them coming back." My heart raced as he explained how his rituals bound the customers to the restaurant, ensuring they craved his food with an insatiable hunger. I felt sick. "You can't be serious." "Maybe, but it works," he replied, the eerie calm in his voice sending chills down my spine. "You've seen it, business is booming." I was horrified, ready to flee, but he blocked my escape. "You've seen too much. You can't leave." In that moment, panic surged. I bolted, sprinting through the kitchen, past the empty dining room, and out into the night. I didn't stop running until I reached my apartment, heart pounding in my ears. I never returned to that restaurant, nor did I ever collect my last paycheck. But the memories haunted me, and I often found myself checking online reviews, wondering if the customers knew the truth about what lay behind Marco's culinary magic. As I moved on with my life, the shadows of Adrian and Marco lingered. It was a reminder that sometimes the allure of success comes with a price, one that can bind you to a darkness you may never escape.